Hi, everyone. I'm Harris from the team at Medium, and I am here with 3 writers on Medium who have turned their Medium work into books. And we'll talk about that journey, how they became book authors, and what you might be able to learn if you're in the audience and you want to publish a book one day. So I'll just introduce them really quickly. Julio Vincent Gambuto is a filmmaker and author of Please Unsubscribe, Thanks, How to Take Back Our Time, Attention, and Purpose in a World Designed to Bury Us in Bullshit. And that book was actually just released this week, so congrats, Julio. And hello.
Thank you.
And we've got Kaki Okamura, author of Wa, The Art of Balance, who writes about health and wellness on Medium. Hi, Kaki.
Hi.
And lastly, Ben Sledge, author of Where Cowards Go to Die, who is a combat wounded veteran in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, writes on Medium about a number of topics, most notably his experiences as a veteran. So all of you have done this incredible thing of written on Medium, shared your perspectives and your stories on Medium, and then translated that into a book. Let's talk about how that happened. I want to just kick it off by going back to the beginning, and I'm wondering, why did you start on Medium? When you came to Medium, what were you expecting? What motivated you as a writer in the early days? And then we can go through the journey from there. Maybe we can start with Julio to kick it off.
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here, and thank you, Harris and the team, for having me. You know, in the beginning, I was really attracted to Medium because of the interface. Like, the actual visual interface was really clean and simple to me. And so I had been sort of expressing thoughts on Facebook and expressing thoughts on Twitter and all the other online platforms, but I felt like I wanted a space where I could be thoughtful and considerate and could actually pen or key something that was a little bit more meaningful than kind of ranting on Facebook. So, but it was the visual interface actually that attracted me in the beginning, because I thought this is clean and sort of allows for the type of communication that I wanted to craft.
Kaki, what about you?
Yeah, I would say, so I actually don't have like a formal education or background in writing, and finding Medium, I found that it was a really nice space for people who maybe not would describe themselves as writers, but had interesting ideas or topics they wanted to share about. And I thought it was a really great environment for that. I feel like the barrier to entry is really low, but you can find really talented people who are experts in their niche. And I started off as a reader, just reading other people's writing, but eventually I thought like, oh, maybe I could share something about something that I thought was interesting. And so it really went from there. And yeah, I would agree that the interface looks really clean and nice, and it's a really great place for thoughtful writing. I would also say the community is like a lot kinder and more thoughtful than what you might find on like Facebook or Instagram. So I've also appreciated that.
Ben, why don't you jump in? What was your path to Medium?
I was writing on WordPress, and like Kaki, I don't have a formal background as far as master's in writing or anything. I took like a creative writing class once in college. And I had started writing for the company that I was working for at the time, and I was writing on WordPress, and I saw an article that was from one of the publications on Medium, and they were talking about how they had got all their year's worth of traffic that they normally would have got through like WordPress or someplace else in one blog post. And that kind of blew me away. And I was like, well, let's try it. And same thing, I love the interface as a web developer and graphic designer, also by trade. Like, it was beautiful. And I was like, this seems like a really good place and use of white space to get a message out. And so I wrote a couple articles. I had like, I think 10 to 15 followers who were like friends of mine, and all of a sudden one article just took off and blew up, and I got an entire year's worth and then some traffic just out of one article that we normally would have got on WordPress. And so I immediately switched over and have been writing there ever since.
Yeah, that's I think a commonality amongst all of you. I know your work pretty well at this point, but I think each of you had this moment when you were writing on Medium and then came to understand the power of the audience and the power of a story really taking off and it changing your trajectory in some way. So I think we can maybe transition into like that inflection point in your career as a writer, because it seems like that's what led to the book in many cases. Maybe it's clearest in your case, Julio, with Prepare for the Ultimate Gaslighting, which was, you know, everyone was telling me about that story a few years ago. So talk a little bit about that, how that came about, and what happened when it went viral.
Sure. So it was a month into the pandemic. It was sort of the height of the crisis, and I had written and posted on Medium a number of times before, and some of my work was getting a little bit more traction, meaning a few more eyeballs were on it and a few more readers. But mostly, you know, like Ben said, it was people that I knew and people that I, you know, had sort of understood me as a thinker and writer, but in a very, very, very small circle. And then about a month into the crisis, you know, shit got dark, if you will, and I had this moment where I had gone to bed the night before and was really overwhelmed by how awful it was here in New York City, and got up the next morning, and J. Crew sent me an email and was like, "Hey, you want to buy a sweater?" And I was appalled and overwhelmed and kind of needed, I was alone in my apartment and I just needed to communicate. I needed to kind of express that fury that I had in that moment about what was happening and what was about to happen. And so I wrote an essay called Prepare for the Ultimate Gaslighting. It went online on a Friday morning, and I posted it on Medium, but then shared it on Facebook. And it was this weird experience of just watching the numbers go up and up and up, and people were sharing it and talking about it. And it was surreal. I mean, honestly, it was just kind of, I've been a creative for 20 years and I couldn't pay people to you know, watch my work or watch my movies. And then this happened, and it went viral around the world in 2 days, and went to about 15 million people that weekend. It was bizarre. It was incredible. It was also really humbling and strange, frankly. So, but that happened, and then after that is when I got approached for lit representation, and an agent called and said, "Hey, have you thought about a book?" And I've been a writer since I was 10. So I was like, yeah, of course I've thought about a book. I've always thought about a book. But I didn't think it was going to be about, you know, what it wound up being about.
Yeah, I just have to say, I remember when that essay was going around, my friends' parents were telling me about Prepare for the Ultimate Gaslighting, like not knowing that I worked here. And it was everywhere for a period of time. So
I had somebody send it to me and say, "You really should read this." And I was like, "Dude, I wrote it." You know, like, very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Kaki, I'm wondering if you could, I'd love to hear your journey too. Were there any specific stories that really popped out in your writing career on Medium that seemed to reach a broader audience than your others? And what was it about those stories that you think really resonated with people?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, just my background, or the things I write about are, you know, Japanese lifestyle or wellness practices that, you know, I actually don't see very often in the US. And, you know, writing on Medium was really me moving from Japan to the US and being like, oh, all these things are different and pros and cons of it. And so, you know, the viral article for me, it was called How Japanese People Stay Fit for Life Without stepping into the gym or going into the gym. And yeah, I think it was similarly, into the US or living in the US, I really felt the narrative around exercise was really different from what I experienced in Japan. I feel like fitness culture here is huge. People love to talk about fitness, and there's really a go big or go home mentality that in Japan, when it came to exercise, it wasn't quite like that. It was very much about like, oh, like integrating into your lifestyle. People didn't really like work out at the gym. Is really the kind of common theme is that people walk a lot. So if you live in any major city, like people walk everywhere. Public transportation is great. And so yeah, kind of seeing how different that was in the US, where, you know, people were like, oh, I need to take, you know, set aside an hour to work out. I need to get really sweaty and get really tired, and I need to feel really exhausted at the end. But trying to think about exercise in a way that wasn't quite like that. And, you know, if you like going to the gym, that's great. But I also think it's not for everyone. There's a lot of different ways to move your body. And so just having that idea, I felt like people didn't talk about it as much in the US. So I wrote a piece on it. It was, you know, I was writing quite a lot at that point. I didn't have any, you know, followers or viewers, but I kind of just did it because I enjoyed it. But that one piece went very viral. I can't explain to you why that piece out of the rest I wrote, but yeah, I would say I share those sentiments of like, it was really surreal. It was really weird. It was really cool. But yeah, just seeing those like numbers go up and the number of views, and I think seeing how many people from different countries also read it. So, you know, when I'm writing, I'm thinking about the US, but hearing people from like Europe or South America, you know, kind of reach out and be like, oh, like I totally resonate with this. Or when I went to Japan, I experienced something really similar. That was also really incredible to just hear from other people what, you know, how they may have, you know, felt similar experiences, or, you know, felt that it was like a nice way to think about a different way of living that they might have not come across otherwise.
Yeah, I think what sort of the commonality between, I think all of you, but those two stories in particular, is you were saying something that a lot of people hadn't heard, but maybe some people were feeling or thinking, like there's something that feels too intense about like fitness culture in America, or like there's something that feels off about how brands are speaking to us in like April 2020, and saying the quiet part out loud for people is really valuable. And, you know, obviously there's no formula, but I think that's maybe a part of it. Ben, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience writing about your time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I know there was one story in particular that sort of broke that open for you, where you started writing about that for the first time. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So what ended up happening with me was I was one of those veterans who never talked about their experience. Like my wife didn't even know much of what had transpired overseas. My friends around me, I remember one day a friend of mine goes, hey, I know you served overseas. I've seen some medals on your wall, but aside from that, I don't know anything you did, man. And I was part of that silent brotherhood, you know, that's the way my grandfather was about his experience in World War II. And then as I dove into my work in mental health and got certified in like crisis response, trauma care, and suicide prevention, I learned about a term called moral injury. And it's the psychological damage and shame that occurs when you have to do things that violate your sense of right and wrong. So basically everything that you do in war, where you're dealing in human lives and collateral, unfortunately. And so I just kind of out of this point of brokenness, very much like Julio, where I was just like, man, I don't think people grasp, like we got put in impossible situations. And granted, nobody held a gun to our head and said you have to enlist. But when you're in those environments, you're forced to do certain things. And so it was a conversation about war and veterans we refused to have, and it just took off stupid. And I posted it for Memorial Day, talking about, you know, this is why we do a lot of remembrance for those of us that fought overseas. And that really kind of started the trajectory and my journey. And then I started writing more, and I had other articles just go stupid viral. My most viral one was when I was writing about, it was just, again, I talked about my military experience in it, where the camaraderie and the brotherhood and being so close knit with other men. And it was from that conversation that everybody was having about toxic masculinity. And so I entitled this article, you know, today's problem with masculinity isn't what you think. It isn't what you think it is. And people have loved that article, regardless of where they are on the spectrum of political ideologies. And so many people have thanked me for that. And that really began when literary agents began to take a look at me. And then on top of that, I started doing investigative journalism. I spent a year researching a piece with Steph from Medium. And we released that. And I just found out, I was reading a book called Jesus and John Wayne, because I read about faith stuff too. And found out that I'm a quoted source in there from an article on Medium. And that kind of blew me away, because it was a New York Times bestseller for her. And Anyway, out of that, literary agents started approaching me and they're like, have you considered writing a book just like Julio? And I was like, well, duh. So I did my research. One of my friends, luckily he's my writing mentor. He has an agent. He got multiple book deals, and contacted him. And I was like, what do I need to know? I'm walking into this blind. And so I would tell everyone here, make sure you talk to somebody who knows the industry, because otherwise you might get set up for failure. So he really just gave me an inside scoop. And from there, I signed with an agent. And then we put together a book proposal, started pitching it around. And I went through about 40 to 50 rejections from publishing houses. And then eventually I had 2 offers, and we went with the kind of the larger one.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's an amazing story. I also just have to say your masculinity story, I've read it multiple times, and actually we were just passing it around. Like, I was talking to a colleague at Medium about it too, because it's evergreen, and thank you for writing it. So I wanted to get into that, the journey of taking your work on Medium and shaping it into a book. But before we get there, let's talk about this agent, this like fairy godmother lit agent.
Who steals all your money? They know it too.
So I imagine there are some people in the audience who are thinking like, what can I do to just like magically be approached by the publishing industry? What do you think attracted literary agents and publishers to your work? Kaki, I know in your case, like, correct me if I'm wrong, a literary agent and a publisher both reached out to you independently, and then you sort of went on a journey for a few years or a little while, and then eventually got back to them. Talk to me about what that was like, and sort of what you think attracted them to your work. How did they notice you?
Yeah. So in retrospect, maybe I should have just went for it. But, when my writing went viral, I had an agent reach out to me, and she's like, hey, have you ever written a book? Would you be interested in this? And at the time, I actually was like, oh, I'm really not in a place where I feel like I want to write a book. I wouldn't know how to approach it. I didn't know what I wanted to write about. And if I was going to write a book, I wanted it to be something, that I was really proud of and ready for. So I was like, oh, I'm not ready yet, but I'll keep you in mind. Thank you. And yeah, I think maybe a few years after that, a editor reached out to me. And she was like, oh, we really love your writing. Like, would you be interested in working with us? And at that point, I felt a bit more ready about writing a book. And I had a lot of ideas going around, and maybe I'll talk about this more in depth later, but something about a book is very different from writing online that was really appealing to me. And so at that point, I went back to the agent and kind of asked her what kind of books she's represented, what kind of work she's worked on. And something about this agent was that she did a lot of work in like the wellness health space. She had a background working with authors who did that kind of writing. She clearly has been following my writing for a really long time. So that also meant a lot to me. It wasn't just, oh, this is a viral person, she's in my niche, I'm going to try and work with her. Like, we would like keep it, like I would get replies from her randomly when I published writing. And so there's a lot of trust there. And this editor that reached out to me, I looked at the books they worked on, and it's also a lot in like health, well-being, things around that space. And so it felt like a really good match. I think on the other side as well, they're looking at my writing and going like, oh, this is the kind of work we are interested in. These are the kind of authors we work with. And so kind of, an advice for standing out maybe is something that worked well for me is really niching down. It's not like I was writing about everything about health or trying to take on multiple views. If you look at the health space, there's so many different ways of approaching and talking about it. And, my writing is not for everyone. It's really for a specific person who struggles their health in a very unique way. And I'm catering to that group. And I think when you niche down and you become like someone who stands out in that niche, you stand out to agents, you stand out to readers. And so, yeah, if you're, something you're interested in, like go full in on that like niche and get, try and become that expert in that space if you can. I think that really helped me stand out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And especially knowing your work, that absolutely makes sense. And I think you've done a great job of just positioning it so well and sort of branding yourself really well on Medium and also outside of Medium. Julio, what advice would you have for writers who are on Medium, who maybe want to publish a book one day and don't know sort of how to do that or how to make contact with an agent? We actually just got a question from the audience. Do agents generally reach out to authors, or can authors reach out to agents? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. So I think it happens both ways, and you can approach agents and say, this is what I work about, and this is my work, and you can ask for general meetings, and you can send an email, or back in the day it was a query letter or an introduction letter. And so I think it works both ways, and it's a relationship like any other, where it kind of has to work for both parties, and it has to be something that you both come to with clear eyes and with an open heart, and Kaki hit the nail on the head with a lot of trust. There was Julie, who's my agent, had read a lot of my work before. So it wasn't just this viral moment, it was kind of leading up to that. And so when we had our first conversation, that conversation was about the voice in the writing. And, so it's kind of odd for me to talk about it this way in the third person, but it was really about that voice, right? It was about kind of the authenticity of that voice that she was attracted to. And her job is to, expose editors and publishers to things that are authentic and unique. And so I have kind of leaned into that in my writing, knowing that it kind of was something that appealed to people. So for example, in the subtitle of my book is the word bullshit. And it was a word that we used, or that I used in the original essay. And so there were a number of people saying to me, that shouldn't be in your subtitle. You can't go there in a book. And my agent and myself were really adamant that was important, because it was a part of the voice that had resonated with the article. Anyway, to answer your question, I think finding sort of parallel to what Kaki is saying about drilling down and niching down, I think that's also important to do internally, right? Which is, okay, like, who am I at my core, and what do I want to be expressing at my core? And the way I always explain it to people is like, what can you write that no one else could possibly write? And it's not a matter of trying to go viral or trying, obviously, right, easy for us to say, but it's not necessarily a matter of trying to recreate that experience or get as many eyeballs as you can. But the challenge and the advice, I think, that's important is, what can you do that nobody else can do? Or what's the perspective that you're coming from that no one else is coming from? Or at least how can you articulate your perspective in a way that's unique?
Yeah, absolutely. We just got a question. Did any of you, and you were all sort of mentioning you had thought about writing a book. I think you're all writers. You've been writers for a really long time. It had crossed your mind writing a book at some point. Did you think about self-publishing, or what made you sort of want to go this traditional route? What were your thoughts on self-publishing? I've been on Medium for years. I've seen many writers self-publish. I've also seen many writers be approached by agents. I don't think that there's a right or wrong way to go about it, but I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts on that. Maybe we could start with Ben.
Yeah, so let me give you the industry insights, because I've been involved in this for a while now. I run another company with my business partner called Sockel Media, where we literally do book publishing and give people those industry insights. So this will be some stuff that people want to hear. I've done self-publishing. I've ghostwritten for clients who self-publish and done quite well. Really, it depends on you kind of what you're looking at doing. So for me, I think you can do a hybrid model, because some publishers are going to pass on a certain book that you may be passionate about, and it may just blow up in the self-publishing world. You can put it out there, but there's always a cost-benefit analysis to all of this. So in the traditional publishing world, you get an advance, and you get to sit and you get to write this manuscript, and then you go through it with an editor. They make changes, they make the book covers and everything. Self-publishing, you're going to do that all yourself. You're going to have to hire a copywriter, a copy editor, to go through your script, ensure that it meets Chicago Manual of Style. And then on top of that, you're going to have to hire out somebody to design the book cover. Because if you've never noticed this, all book covers and genres look the same. And it's because we have this mental trick in our head that says, oh, if it looks like this and I enjoyed this book, then therefore I will like this one as well. So you have to kind of really hone in and niche down into that. And on top of that, Amazon and Ingram Spark and all the self-publishing places, they're going to take a percentage of your royalties as well. You're going to have to do your own marketing as well, which I'll be honest, the traditional publishing model, their marketing sucks. Like due to the DOJ inquiry into Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House, we discovered that these firms, they only spend 2% of their budget on marketing for their authors. Most of it you're going to have to do yourself. So, and there's no guarantee whether your book is going to actually take off. 90% of authors in the traditionally published book world never sell more than 2,000 copies in their entire lifetime. So if you sell over 2,000 copies, you're in that top 10%. It'll probably keep you getting dropped from your publishing house, your agent, the whole 9 yards. So there's give and takes. And honestly, the best that we've really seen kind of come out of that world is a guy named Hugh Howey. He wrote the Wool series, which is now on Apple TV. He self-published, and then he got a hybrid deal where he gets to keep more of his royalties, and he's allowed to also effectively kind of come in and negotiate the terms of what he wants to do. And now that dude just gets to sail around the world and write.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the publishing industry, as you mentioned, is fraught and is changing. Julio, how's it been for you? Your book came out this week. What has the experience been like for you, going through more of a traditional experience?
I have a slightly different perspective than Ben because, not entirely different, but I had self-published a book about freelancing about 5 years prior to this book. It was like 100 tips to help people who were looking to work independently. And the really kind of fun part about that is it's pretty immediate, the response, right? You put your book out there and you create the means for somebody to buy it, and they buy it, and the money goes into your account, right? It's just like a very easy, straightforward way to present your work. And so I would never discourage anyone from doing that. I quite enjoyed self-publishing, and especially with Medium, where you can do the type of work that you're then writing a book about. They sort of work together really nicely. I have to say I've loved working with my publisher. It's Avid Reader Press at Simon & Schuster. They have been the most supportive, incredible humans. I've worked in the creative industries for a long time, and when you're kind of used to working in film, where it's really difficult to even get people to pay attention, book people are fantastic, and they're just really, really kind. They're really interested in the actual words on the page, which I know sounds so silly, but I'll give you an example. When first started talking about the book proposal, I had proposed to my agent that I send a PowerPoint to the publisher or to the editors about what the book was about, and she was like, "No, we do not do PowerPoint. Like 12-point Times New Roman on a piece of paper. That's it." And so it was a quick lesson in sort of, reminding myself that it's not about the razzmatazz at all. It is about the sentences on the page. And that's been really refreshing, to be honest. I love working in film. I love working with movie people. They're incredible artists. But book people, there's something very, very particular about them. And everyone from the lit agent to the editor to the publisher to the associate publisher, just really, really smart, intellectually curious, conversational, generally good humans. So it's been good. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, I love that perspective. Kaki, what was your experience with your publisher?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of the sentiment that was shared. There's something about having a team that has your back, which is really incredible. I think when I write on Medium, it's a very solo activity. Like I sit down in front of the computer, I'm alone, I'm writing all my ideas, I'm editing things on my own. And my work also has a lot of illustrations. So like I'm thinking about, okay, how do I want to represent or tell this story? Whereas it's so nice when you have someone like reading your writing, and they also come from writing backgrounds. And in a lot of ways, they're a lot more talented in writing because they have a longer background in it. And having those people look after my writing and also really think about, okay, who are we speaking to? How do we want to present this? Even things outside of just the writing. When I was doing marketing, you know, having a team that does your outreach for you, trying to find like good podcasts or publications to share your work in, and just so many more opportunities that I could have never done on my own. Yeah, like I just feel so much gratitude for the team that supported, you know, this book in not just getting the book done, but also like trying to get it to the right audience. So yeah, I would say, you know, there's a lot of nice things about self-publishing. It's a lot, there are barriers in ways, but I do think having a publisher have your back has been really important to me.
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left. So if people have questions, we can open it up for Q&A. And while we gather questions, I wanted to ask each of you, what was the experience of, you know, the editorial experience of looking back on your Medium work and drawing a book out of that somehow? And, you know, how did you actually do that? And what lessons did that teach you about yourself as a writer? Maybe we could start with Ben.
Yeah. So when we were putting together like a book proposal, I was like, well, what should I write about? And everybody was like, oh, I like your war stuff. And I'm like, I'm not going to write, you know, and luckily Steph at Medium, I butcher her last name. Can you help me out on that, Harris?
Georgiopoulos.
Yes. She's since left, but she really pushed me to do it. And then I had other people who were curious about like my own spiritual space as far as like, how is war like a spiritual experience? So I had to combine those two. And it was very, very strange in many ways. But like John Gorman, he's an essayist on Medium. He really encouraged me to do both, as well as Matt Tomick. He writes fiction. Justin Cox, who is the writing cooperative. I just spoke with different men and women from Medium and said, what do you guys think that I should write about based on the articles that I've written on Medium? And they said, these are the standouts right here. And if you could combine those, we don't know how you're going to do it, but I think you'd have something that's solid gold. And so out of that, using what I had written on Medium, and there are even chapters in my own book that came directly from the essays and articles that I've written on Medium about my wartime experience or things that I had struggled with as a kid, because I was the metalhead, I was the goth kid. And so I wanted to encourage like that generation of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, listening to like Metallica, and everyone said, you know, we worship Satan and kick puppies, into my book to show like kind of this character arc journey of the person who I was as a youth who ended up in the military, and how did that happen? So all of those kind of combined together to become something that I'm really proud of. And out of that has now won 3 major awards and is up for 2 others. And I'm so pleased that out of the essays that I wrote on Medium, I was able to pull content from them.
Yeah, congrats. Yes, I've read your book, and it's a journey, and it's really an evolution, definitely. So it's very personal and very human, and I appreciate that. Kaki, I'd love to hear how you, especially because you incorporate illustrations in your work on Medium, how did you translate the vibe of your work on Medium into a book? How much of it's based on your work on Medium? How much of it was new material?
Yeah, I would say my book was definitely heavily influenced by what I was doing on Medium. But a big motivation from going from Medium to the book for me was trying to think in more terms of like evergreen content. And, you know, when you write a book, you just have so many more words that you can use to kind of translate a message. Whereas when you write online, you know, it's hard to tell that story over time. People, you don't know in what order people are going to read things. You don't know where they're coming from. And so a lot of the times it's hard to build on like those more complex or complicated ideas, or really be able to tell that story as a whole. And so, you know, writing the book for me was really trying to think about, okay, if this isn't something that someone just reads within like a few minutes and then forgets about it. This is something that someone might leave on their shelf and they might come back to it. They might highlight things, they might write notes. So trying to think about, what is that evergreen content was a big part of like my writing process in general. The way my illustrations fit, I think, well, first of all, I just draw because I think it really adds to the words. I think when, words can do a lot, but there's also like a very strong vision or image in my head when I write. And so being able to touch on topics that are as sensitive as health or, these are really personal experiences for a lot of people and they experience it in really different ways, but being able to touch on these sensitive topics and have a more gentle way of talking about it, bringing it up and making it feel less anxiety inducing, that is also a really big motivation for the way I present my writing. And so being able to think about like, okay, how do I talk about health and what would it look like? How would I want like a, younger version of myself or my sisters to read this work? I would think about that a lot when I wrote. So I would say, yeah, the illustrations were really about me visualizing how I would want someone to speak to me and the kind of feelings I'd want them to evoke when talking about topics that traditionally can be really anxiety inducing or really stressful. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question completely, but
Yeah. I love the way that you use Medium sort of as an open canvas for words and illustrations and how you think really into, I'm not inside your head, but like what I imagine is that you think really carefully about how the words and the illustrations play together on the page. And I really appreciate that when I'm reading your work on Medium. It feels very considered. Julio, what was the editorial process for you? I know that, how did your work on Medium inform the book?
Sure. Well, I think one of the important words that Kaki mentioned is evergreen, because when you go to write a book, you're looking at a 2 to 3 year process, and obviously that's different for everybody, and it varies publishing house to publishing house. But for the most part, at least in my experience with this first book, it has been a 2.5 year process, and so you have to be writing about something and in a way that is going to still resonate when it comes out. And this was really difficult because for me, the article was so of the moment. That essay was so in that week or weekend that to think about it in terms of a book was challenging. And so we put the book proposal together. And if it's helpful for anybody to know, the book proposal is about 100 pages. It has sample chapters. It has an outline of every chapter in the book. It has a background on yourself and your work, how you're going to promote it, all sorts of information. And happy to talk offline with anybody who wants more information about that. But the book proposal originally for mine was, 10 lessons we learned from the pandemic. And then 2 months later, Fareed Zakaria wrote a book called 10 Lessons to Learn for a Post-Pandemic World. And it just jumped the shark so quickly because the situation was changing. And I was like, well, if Fareed Zakaria wrote it, no one's going to want to hear from me about it. So it just sort of just kept changing. And so we just kept coming back to, what is going to be evergreen when we get through this process? What is going to be something that really resonates with people? And so I had to look really critically at the essay and say, okay, what is it that resonated? And so it was less about the actual content and was more about this combination of sort of how I describe the book now, which is it's self-help meets the system. And so that's kind of what I had taken from the essay with a critical eye and talked to a lot of people like Harris and other editors to say, hey, what resonated for you about this work? And that was a helpful way to approach the book because it was less about the actual content and much more about kind of, okay, who are you as the voice? Who are you as the writer? And how do I kind of extend that? So that's how we got to where we are.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a valuable process for all of you just to take a step back and really interrogate and look more closely at the work that you had been publishing on Medium on a regular basis. We just got a question from Sean in the audience related to that topic. Were there any challenges you faced having written more short form content on Medium and then translating it into having to write at length, writing a full book? And do you have any plans to write more books? If anyone wants to jump in.
I can start. Yeah, I don't know about the other authors on this panel, but I had a major procrastination problem writing. It was, it wasn't just me sitting and having all these ideas going on. It was like feeling really overwhelmed and really like, I was like, I don't want to mess this up, so I'm not even going to write about it. And like that need for it to be perfect, like really hampered on that writing process. I think in the moment where I was like, okay, you know what? Like, it doesn't need to be perfect. I just need to write something. That's when like writing the book became a lot easier. I think my approach to writing on Medium is really like, there's an interesting idea. I'm going to see how to, I just want to write about it and share it with a wider audience. Whereas writing a book, it's a whole journey. You need to think about it in the whole space. And so it's really difficult from being like, oh, I just found something interesting, I'm going to write 500 words on it, to, okay, beginning, middle, end. How do I want this journey to, evolve over, several pages? But not trying to go too far deep into that and being like, okay, it doesn't need to be perfect here. There's going to be other people helping me later. How do I just get these ideas on the page? We can fit in the puzzle later. So just writing is so much more important than trying to write, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Does anybody else have thoughts on challenges when you're translating short form content to long? Yeah, Ben.
I'll go short because I know we only got like 2 minutes or 3 minutes left in the session. Most authors don't know how to write a compelling introduction, and they don't know how to stick the landing. And so I rewrote my ending 6 times of my book because I couldn't stick the landing. And then on top of that, for me, I had to consider, I had this character arc, I had to bring my readers on a journey of who I was as a young kid to the man that I am now. And so you have to think of it in terms like that in hero's journey. And sometimes I wanted to really make myself look better than what I appeared. And I realized if I want this human, if I want that character arc, then I have to show all the ugly. And I did that with some of the other major characters in the book. And my team sergeant came back to me and he goes, Ben, you're making me sound like I'm a superhero. And he goes, I'm not that. He goes, you need to write in my flaws. And so ensuring that you have like that human connection, that point, that story, and an intro and really stick the landing is going to make it be what becomes sticky in other people's minds. So those were huge challenges for me to overcome.
Yeah. All right, we have a few minutes left. I just want to end with any tips that you have. Maybe one tip. We can do a quick lightning round. One tip that you have for people in the audience who want to write a book one day. Maybe they're writing on Medium and they know they have a book in them, but they're wondering how to make it happen. Maybe we can start with Kaki.
Yeah, I would say, just it's more important to be consistent than it is to be like good at it. There are really amazing writers out there who probably just wouldn't consistently write. They feel like, if I write something and it doesn't go viral, it was a failure. It's really not about that. There are definitely writers who are super talented who just haven't had that visibility because it's really about just showing up every day, publishing something, sharing it with someone else. And so, yeah, my advice would be consistency over perfection.
Cool. What about Julio?
My advice is fail fast. And I take this not from necessarily the book and Medium, but from my film work. Like, don't hold on to things forever thinking that, 3 years from now, so it's going to be even more incredible than it is now. Like, just get it out there, get people to respond to it, hear what an agent thinks, try to find an editor or publisher who you can at least just get an intro meeting with to give you feedback or put it out to Medium and on Medium and ask people to respond about their thoughts about its feasibility or viability as a larger work or as a book. Just your heart goes into every piece you write, as it does for all of us. And it's important to not necessarily think of everything as so precious that it has to be perfect before you get it out there to get feedback, because the feedback is going to help you kind of chart the course forward. And if you never get it, it feels safe and comfortable, but you kind of make the road a little harder for yourself. So, that's because I'm 45 now and spent 20 years holding on to everything, right? Stop holding, just get it out.
Love that. Yeah, Ben, what about you?
Embrace rejection. The reason why is that was the biggest thing that I learned early on. I asked my writing mentor, I said, how did you become a Wall Street Journal bestseller? He said, first you have to ask me how many times I've been rejected. And he goes on to tell me this story about how, like, in our city, there's probably 100,000 people that want to write. Half of them will actually sit down and write something. That'll have that number. That 50,000 will sit down and write something. It'll be garbage because it's their first time. And he said this process will continue until there's actually maybe 100 people that are actually serious about writing in our city. And that kind of blew me away. And he goes, now ask me how many times I've been rejected. And I was like, Josh, how many times have you been rejected? He said, close to 600 times. And now he's a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And so for me, it's that endurance. And if you can't learn to handle rejection, because you will get it, then the key is just really keeping after it for me. And that's what it's been.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I love all of that advice. Embrace rejection, fail fast, and consistency. Be consistent instead of being excellent all the time. Just be consistent. Thank you guys so much. We're at time. I really appreciate all of you. And thanks again. Check out their books. Check out their Medium profiles. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Harris.
Appreciate it.